Now, what you were saying in that, John, is that Gough Whitlam and his Labour Party were communists. That's pretty strong.
That was Mrs. Eagler's opinion.
Well, that's what the ad was saying.
I've never disagreed with that. Insofar as the Labour Party has in its platform its stated objective the socialisation of industry, production, distribution and exchange. In other words, government control and or ownership of all those things.
Would you say Gough Whitlam was a communist?
No, I wouldn't, because there are laws of libel that prevent me saying that.
Although they reject obvious extremes in propaganda, most Australians succumb easily to wholesale manipulation by the press. A prime example was the recent vendetta by newspaper proprietor Rupert Murdoch against Prime Minister Gough Whitlam.
This is the newsroom of the Melbourne Age, one of the few good major newspapers in Australia. The Australian press, television and radio
are largely owned
by just three families: Murdoch of Adelaide and Sydney, Fairfax and Packer of Sydney. Media censorship in Australia is insidious, and there's probably more censorship by the press than in any Western country. In politics, for example, the heads of the three families support or oppose national politicians rather like godfathers, although of course they would prefer the title of kingmakers. The most powerful godfather was the late Frank Packer, whom I worked for as a reporter and sub-editor. Packer was an ex-boxer, the last of the wild men of Sydney, and it was largely his support for Sir Robert Menzies that kept Menzies in power for so long. Packer, of course, got his knighthood. But the most powerful man in the Australian press is undoubtedly Rupert Murdoch. Before the 1972 election, Murdoch decided that Gough Whitlam of the Labour Party was his man, and he phoned the then Liberal Prime Minister, Billy McMahon, to tell him he was dropping him. But once in office, Whitlam refused to follow the Murdoch line, whatever that was, and he too was dropped. In the election campaign last December, journalists on 3 of Murdoch's newspapers went on strike because of the way their stories were being rewritten and distorted to show an anti-Whitlam bias. Whitlam was slaughtered at the polls for a number of reasons, but no one doubted that the press in Australia had won again.
The Governor-General, Sir John Kerr, had been Whitlam's own choice, partly because, as Whitlam told me, he had the look of Victorian respectability, which some Australians much admire. Whitlam was overthrown in a classically bloodless coup d'etat led by Kerr, who invoked archaic constitutional powers that had never been used. It is said that Fraser, then the opposition leader, engineered the coup by helping to persuade Kerr to use his viceregal powers to dismiss the Prime Minister.
The proclamation which you have just heard read by the Governor-General's official secretary was countersigned Malcolm Fraser.